Hello, everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Daisy Jones and the Six Rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something I call Take the Doughnut. It's another way to say carpe diem. It's all about going after the things that you want in life. And something that I wanted to do this year is rewatch the show Daisy Jones and the Six and now talk about it with other people, with all of you, anybody else who's a fan of this show. I want to talk about it with you. And so here we are doing a deep dive rewatch podcast about the show. Just in terms of format, so you know, I'm going to, although I know probably a lot of people are coming to this having seen the whole show already, I would like to try to accommodate the people who are seeing it for the first time. So I'm going to do a deep dive. We're going to go scene by scene, but I'm going to try not to spoil anything as we go through. And if you in the comment section want to share thoughts about the show, I'll also ask some questions at the end to prompt some thoughts that I'm looking for about the show. If you're going to say anything that has to do with like a major spoiler, just write spoiler at the top so people know to skip over that if they're new to the show. That way it can be a friendly space for people who have and who haven't seen the show yet. But I'm kind of interested to do this in sort of like an almost kind of book club style, even though we're watching a show. I want to really get into it with you. I'm going to go through like deep details, including dialogue, like pretty much all the dialogue from the show. But I'm also going to ask you bigger sweeping theme questions towards the end. So just in terms of format for this, the way that I'll approach this is give you a little bit of an overview of some of the important details of the episode up front, title, things like that. And then we're going to go through scene by scene, and then I'll pull out a section of just like the music that we hit in this particular episode, my favorite quotes, and then a few questions to consider at the end. And because this is our very first episode, before I get into the scene by scene breakdown, I would like to have a few general notes about the pacing of the show and the structure of the show, because this is really the best place to put those thoughts since we're introducing it all here in this episode. So, okay, here we are. We're going to talk about episode 1 of 10. This one is called Come and Get It. It originally aired March 3rd, 2023. It was dropped, these were sort of dropped in batches, so it wasn't dropped alone on March 3rd, but we're going to talk about it alone today. This was written for television by Scott Neustadter and Michael H. Weber, and it was directed by James Ponsoldt. I'm going to give you a description. It's kind of a lengthy-ish description, but I think it really hits all the major points. 20 years after the dissolution of the famous rock band Daisy Jones and the Six in 1977, its members agree to participate in a documentary about the band's history. Beginning in 1968, the wealthy yet neglected Daisy Jones spends her teenage years at Sunset Strip music clubs and parties. She eventually begins writing her own songs. Meanwhile, in the Hazelwood neighborhood of Pittsburgh, brothers Billy and Graham Dunn form a band called the Dunn Brothers with their friends Eddie Roundtree, Warren Rojas, and Chuck Loving. They find local success, but Chuck eventually leaves for college. Tour manager Rod Reyes advises Billy to move the band to Los Angeles. They do so along with Billy's girlfriend, Camila Alvarez. Daisy breaks up with a screenwriter who intends to make her his muse. She sings her own song at a nightclub and decides to aim for a music career. I actually think they did a pretty good job covering the big points of this episode here. And before we get into looking at this scene by scene, I think it's important when you start talking about a show, or a movie for that matter, to talk a little bit about some of the big picture stuff that we need to look at here. And for me, a couple things that are worth discussing up front are pacing of the show and structure of the show. From a pacing standpoint, I think one of the interesting things about this show is it almost reminds me of a horror movie in the way that it's put together. Without spoiling what's ahead, I'll just say when I think of like modern horror movies, I think they really cater to the assumption that people don't want to wait too long to be scared. So a lot of modern horror movies will start with like a cheap thrill in the beginning. They'll start with an unexpected kill or an expected kill at this point. They'll start with something that's really meant to get your energy up because they're trying to hit something in the first 10, 15 minutes that make you say, I'm here watching a horror movie. I'm going to stick around. And then a lot of times they'll pull back and they'll take it slower and they'll rewind, they'll go back in time, they'll show you what happened earlier in the day, they'll show you another character that you haven't seen yet, and they'll start doing an introduction of that character and they'll take it much slower paced and then they'll build back to that like tension that you had at the very beginning, but hopefully now they've earned it a little bit more. And I think movies tend to do this structure now because they're assuming that they need to catch people's attention right from the very beginning. That's probably something that's been proven over time by watch times on movies. It's probably been, something that studios have studied quite a bit, and it's a format that tends to happen more and more now. Whether or not you like it is another issue altogether, but I guess there's a business reason why they're doing it. So when I look at this show, I think about this idea that it feels like an elongated horror movie to me in a way. And actually it kind of is, right? Because we're starting by saying, here's some scenes of this amazing moment. These people reached this incredible pinnacle of success. In 1977, they're on this huge stage to a sold out crowd. It was unbelievable. They're this huge band. They're selling albums, and then they're done. And we get to see a few shots of that. We know what we're building towards, and then they're going to go, we're going to rewind and we're going to take it back to the beginning. And now we're going to actually introduce all of these people properly. And in terms of the pacing of this show, we assume that we are then going to get to that final performance by the end of the show. So to me, there's a structure there that we're trying to build to keep it interesting. When I think about stretching this over 10 episodes, I almost think of it like anytime I see something with like a slow build that really takes time to introduce its characters, I think of like Charles Dickens novels, like stuff where you're like many chapters and you're like, wow, I'm still meeting people. This is me still being introduced to characters before action really takes place. This show starts that way. And I think it's actually a pretty important thing for this show to do because in order for us to earn how important things will be at the end, which we've already seen the end. We know that they break up. This band is going to break up after their major performance at Soldier Field. But we need to earn our way back to that point, and we need to understand why it's so resonant, why it's so impactful, why it really matters. And we're beginning at the very beginning, and we're getting a sense of these people's backstories from much earlier in their lives, before this band was fully together. And for me, that's a really important way to tell this story over 10 episodes. I would be really curious. And this is a question that I'll ask at the end as well, because I would love to get your thoughts on it. How does the pacing work for you? There's an assumption here, I guess, that they need to grab us from the very start and that they're then going to build back up to that. I have heard some people when they talk about this show, there's like sort of an energy dip at certain points. And again, I'm not trying to ask for spoilers here when I make this, but where do you feel we start in terms of energy level? Do you like that we're going this far back at the very beginning? This is something that I'd really love to explore with everybody watching to see, like, is this a style that we like as fans of the show? And of course, everybody's thoughts are welcome here. I encourage active discussion and I encourage people to really think about it. But I'm curious to know, how effective is this style that they've chosen in this day and age? Now, the other thing that I think is worth saying, and it's really wrapped up in that comment, is overall structure. We've got sort of the framing device of the interviews, the future interviews, and then the flashbacks to present day and the flashbacks to the past. So what's actually a flashback here is hard to say in a way. But we've got that framing device. that helps us give context to the things that we're seeing on screen. And in a way, ultimately everybody is kind of an unreliable narrator. So I guess what we're seeing in the show itself, in anytime they're showing us a present day moment direct to camera, I guess we're meant to be thinking that's the truth. And what we're seeing in the interviews is people's interpretations of it. But that is a structure that we're going to play with here in this show. It's also a structure that was played with in the book. And then, of course, we have the device of playing with time, of starting from the end, going back to the beginning, and working our way back to the end. And within that, we've got these flashbacks that are going to be happening. We're going to spend most of our time in the 70s in this show. But this first episode happens not entirely, but most of it happens in the 60s. And so, what does that give us as we look at the big picture here? So I think structurally, we've got a few different devices we're playing with. I think the idea of like future, present day, I don't know what you call it, the future versions of these band members, the ones who are being interviewed, their words, their voiceovers are often cutting into and being like prelapped or overlapped with the footage that we're seeing from the 60s and the 70s. So that is something that you have to get used to with the style of this. But once you kind of grab a hold of that, I think they try to do a pretty good job of keeping it seamless so that we don't get confused by when we're actually watching it. It's just confusing hearing me talk about it. So I'll move on. That's a couple notes about the overall structure of this show that I thought were important to start with. Love to know what works for you and what doesn't work for you along the way. But let's talk about the scenes as they happen. We're going to go scene by scene breakdown, and we're going to start by introducing the framing device of the interviews. The band members are going to sit down individually. Each one is being interviewed individually for these interviews. We haven't seen the interviewer. We're gonna start with quick cuts to them getting into position. Billy is sitting on a park bench, it looks like. He's a little annoyed. Graham sits down in a nice comfy chair. He seems to be quite ready to be interviewed. Eddie is fixing his hair. He's getting all fancy. Suki is testing. She's always keeping it professional. Warren is on a boat. He's also testing, but he's on a boat doing it. Billy says, "How long is this going to take?" He was maybe one of the harder people to convince, you would think, from the beginning of this, based on what I've seen so far. We haven't seen Daisy yet, so I think that's worth noting. And then we're going to get a pre-lap of Cheers. We're going to get this intertitle that basically gives us a bunch of exposition. Because we are playing with time so aggressively here in the beginning, they need to give us some exposition about what they're doing. So we get this intertitle here. On October 4th, 1977, Daisy Jones and the Six performed to a sold-out crowd at Soldier Field in Chicago, Illinois. Now we're going to start seeing a montage of footage of Daisy and Billy walking onto the stage, the whole band being on the stage. We're going to get some footage of the performance. We're going to keep cutting this with these titles, these intertitles. So the next one we're going to get is going to say, they were one of the biggest bands in the world at the time, fresh off their award-winning multi-platinum selling album, Aurora. And then we're going to get more shots of them, like what looks like candid shots of them. The band is on the tarmac next to a private jet. They're interacting with fans. They're getting off of their private jet. We get some shots of them at a press conference. We're going to get shots of them in the studio recording Aurora, we would presume. We start with smiling, happy faces of this band, and then it gets increasingly emotionally intense as we go through. The shots get a little angrier. There's some crying. There's some physical altercations in there. And then we're going to get another intertitle. It would be their final performance. So we really built that. We're then going to get, there's been sort of like a droning music in the background. We're going to get silent shots now of Billy looking at Daisy during that final performance. Daisy looks back and Billy storms off. And you think to yourself, what happened to these people? And if you're not thinking that, I don't know that the show's done its job. So I hope that it hooked you in enough to make you want to keep watching. We're then going to get that next intertitle is going to be in just silence. In the 20 years since, members of the band and their inner circle have refused to speak on the record about what happened. And now we actually hear them speaking again. So Karen's, the interview versions of them are getting ready. Karen says, okay. Warren says, let's get this party started. And Billy says, so Daisy agreed to this? And he looks directly at the camera. And that style here, when we get the interview section, we get a lot of fourth wall breaking, which is almost never a problem for me. I feel like a lot of people cry out against breaking of the fourth wall. Not an issue for me. Here in this structure, it's particularly important because we need as many ways to distinguish the interviews and make it really like easy for us to toggle back and forth between them. So when these characters are looking directly at the camera for the interviews, I think I think you can sort of say either it's that, they're giving this footage, they're talking to the audience because where's this footage going to go? But also they're talking to the interviewer. And so I kind of think of it in both ways. They're having a conversation. They're being prompted by questions along the way. And sometimes you hear the interviewer asking the questions. But I think you can take it in both ways, that they're having this conversation with us and they're having it with the interviewer as well. Um, so Billy has said, so Daisy also agreed to do this. And so the intertitle had just said that they've refused to speak on the record about what happened. And then this next intertitle says, until now. And then we finally see Daisy sit down for an interview. Daisy she's sitting down, she sort of gives a half smile to the camera, and it's a little bit of a, well, you got me here, so what now? Kind of challenge to the interviewer, to us. Um, so presumably, it looked like Billy would have been the hardest person to get there, but he seems to think maybe Daisy would have been a hard person to get there. Uh, I don't know. I guess we're going to have to find out as we go through. We're going to cut from here to the opening credits. And the style of these opening credits, first of all, we're going to hear the song Dancing Barefoot. And the style of these, and this is something that we'll pick up on a little bit in this episode, is that we know that Camila takes photos and it gets footage of the band during this episode. So I sort of think of these main title, the opening credits here, as Camilla's footage, even though I understand that couldn't all be her footage. Some of it is, stuff she won't be there for, or stuff that, she's in it. She has to be in the title somewhere. But I think the style makes me feel like we're seeing their story through her lens. Even though I don't consider her the narrator of this whole thing. She just narrates her parts of the interviews, really. But it feels like it's bringing in that character into the main title. And then we get that dancing barefoot kind of rooting us in the time period as well. Okay, so now after the opening credits are over, we are going to go back to this interview structure. We're going to get the interview with Daisy, and we're going to start getting the, written on the screen, the explanations of who they are. I know there's a word for that. It's slipping my mind right now. It says lead singer, songwriter for her. She shakes her head. I don't even know where to begin. And then we hear a woman's voice, the interviewer. She says, start at the beginning. When did you first fall in love with music? So it helps us hit the reset button. We started with the intense, like, here's the height of the drama, but you don't know anything about that. So now we're going to take you back. How far? To the beginning. We're actually going to flash back to a very young Daisy. I'm going to say around 8 years old. And she's got these huge headphones on. She's sitting in her bedroom. She's listening to the song All Alone I Sit and Cry by Violet Hall. And she's belting it out. And I think, first of all, just title-wise, that song choice is a really interesting one. From what we see of Daisy in this episode, she's such a solitary character. Even when she's with other people, she feels very alone. I think this theme of Daisy being alone is very prominent in her upbringing. In all the iterations we've seen of her, we've seen an 8-year-old version, we see a 15-year-old version, and then we see her, a little bit after that as well when we see the Riley Keough Daisy. And, for me, uh, there's just such an intense solitude about her. Um, nobody nobody's with her. Nobody seems to love her. It's rough. It's a lot to take it in. I think, you know, to get this concentrated over one episode, I think is very important because I feel that it has a lot to do with where this character goes. Um, and so All Alone, I Sit and Cry. She's belting it out. We're going to get the title over that Los Angeles 1961. And that's going to be placed over a cocktail party that's happening in what looks like a living room. Turns out it's her house. It's her parents are having this party. Bunch of grown-ups are over. And Daisy's mom is in a conversation and she can hear Daisy singing. And she does not want that. She's not happy about hearing Daisy. Um, doesn't even matter what she's hearing from Daisy. She just doesn't want to hear Daisy. We're going to cut to an interview with Jonah Berg, who's a journalist. He's an author. We're going to get a book title called The Rise of Daisy Jones. So it goes to show you that this, like, Daisy becomes a big enough deal that this guy is known for writing a biography of her. Um, and I also think it's interesting that the title of the book is The Rise of Daisy Jones. Um, it's not the rise and fall of Daisy Jones. So maybe that gives us some sort of an energy to what this character is all about as well. Um, but Jonah says the interesting thing about Daisy is she was born with every advantage. Her father's money, and we're going to cut between, seeing Jonah talking to what's actually happening at this party. So he's just said, we see every advantage, right? She's got all these advantages. Her father's money. Then we actually see her father. He's at this party. He turns around when he hears Daisy's voice, and he's so annoyed to hear her voice. Okay, so she's got the advantage of her father's money, but my goodness, this man. And then he says, her mother's beauty. Her mother is indeed beautiful, but she also is hearing Daisy's voice and she is annoyed and embarrassed. And she excuses herself from the person that she was talking to so that she can go stop Daisy. So here we've got Jonah saying, advantages, father's money, mother's beauty. She had anything and everything at her disposal. And we watch as Daisy's mom enters Daisy's room. She pulls the needle off of the record. There are a couple people standing at the doorway watching all of this. She's pretty aggressive here. We have this flashback. We see little 8-year-old Daisy with this look of fear on her face. This young actress nailed it. She looks terrified of her mother, and not, I mean, terrified, like, I don't know that I feel like she expects her mom to hit her or slap her across the face. I think she's endured so much pain from this woman that she's just waiting for the next avalanche. And you can just see it all over this child's face. Her mom squats down in front of her and she's got a drink in her hand and she's so menacing. She says, "Do you ever shut up?" Wow. Okay. I mean, talk about this is not a nurturing household. I mean, this is not in any way, this household is not accommodating to having a child in it. They would rather not have a child. They would rather have adult parties and cocktail hours. And even the very, like, hearing their kid is problematic. They expect this child to stay silently in her room all the time, is what I'm gathering. Um, Especially because I don't think this is the only, I think we see another party that they have at the end. Um, so or later in this episode. So like they really would rather that she just not be announcing her presence at all in this house. Do you ever shut up? So Jonah has been saying all of these things that were advantages for her, and then he says, and yet she was completely alone. I feel it. We're going to get this flashback. Daisy again. Daisy's looking very vulnerable. Her mom sneers at her. No one wants to hear your voice. Her mom leaves the room. And as she's shutting the door, the friends of hers who were at the door watching all of this, she says, I swear she was put on this earth to embarrass me. Ouch. I mean, it makes you think, like, look, I don't know if there are any psychologists or psychiatrists who are listening to this or watching this, but I'd be so curious to know when you're brought up under conditions like this, what's the decision tree here? Like, where do people tend to go from here? I'm sure there's more than one typical option of how you develop out of this, but when you're advised not to use your voice, where do you go from there? This seems really formative to me. And knowing that this person is credited as the lead singer songwriter of a band that was very successful tells you something about the way she went. But I definitely feel the loneliness here. Okay, so from there, we're going to get the song Incense and Peppermint as Daisy ages up. It's not a blend aging up. We see her as a kid. We really hold on her face as her mom leaves the room. And then we're going to see her as a teen getting ready to go out. And now it's 1968. She's going to come to the mirror in her bedroom. She's in a dress. We're going to get a handheld camera following her as she goes to the Whiskey A Go Go. And the marquee at Whiskey A Go Go says birds. And then under that, the doors. Wow, right? Um, what a show that would have been. And she's just going to these venues on the Sunset Strip, right? Um, so this is a big one. She walks around the back. She sees a guy smoking. We're going to see as the timeline evolves here in just this first episode, we are going to see that Daisy becomes such a regular that she no longer has to use backdoor entryways to get into clubs. But this is where it starts for her. She's young. She's trying to get out of the house. She's found a love for music. So she goes around behind to the back door of Whiskey A Go Go. She sees this guy smoking. She asks if she can bum a cigarette. A manager calls the guy in, and he leaves the door open after he goes in. So Daisy goes in. Inside, we're going to see dancers in outfits with all the fringe. Are these go-go dancers? Is that what I'm looking at here? Maybe not. Maybe wrong time period. What is this? Um, Again, I should point out for those who didn't see my what to expect video, me in fashion, I don't even have the words. I'm really gonna try. I made notes. I made notes that say things about some clothes. I missed a lot. Okay. And if you've got language for this, you tell me. You're more than welcome to add any contributing thoughts, anybody. Okay, so we're going to see dancers, and then we're going to hear the song Going Back by the Byrds because they're on stage, they're performing. I assume we've got Proxy, the Byrds up here. We're trying to simulate what it would have been like to see the Byrds on stage. Daisy walks in. She smiles. She's watching them. I feel like maybe this is us watching her very first time going to one of these clubs on the Sunset Strip, or it's early days for her. Because she doesn't really have a process for this. I feel like we're watching her discover a love for being in these places in real time. But here she is amid all of these people. She's watching, we can see her eye line to the singers, to the band on stage. And she smiles, and then her smile fades, and she just seems so alone, even in a room full of people and full of energy and full of life. Daisy feels so alone. So there's There's solace for her in being in this place, but you can't get away from yourself even there. We're now going to go from here to Billy. So we're going to we hear this song from the Birds that she was watching them perform on stage, and this same song is going to be playing on a record that Billy is listening to. We start the camera's close up on the record, it pulls out, and we see that Billy is in a soundproof room in a guitar shop. There's a whole bunch of guitars all over the walls. We're going to hear Billy's voiceover. He says there were two options for kids in my town. There was the mill or there was the war. This interview of him now, we're going to see it on screen. It says lead singer, songwriter. So he and Daisy, both lead singer, songwriter. He says, I always dreamed of something different, as opposed to the mill or the war. He smiles a little bit, like, I had dreams. And then we're going to see an intertitle that says Pittsburgh. So Daisy's on one side of the country. The rest of our characters are on the other side of the country, or at least the people that we've met so far. Billy, we're going to cut to him walking on the sidewalk. He's got a bag from Giant Eagle, groceries probably. We're going to see a couple ladies about his age pass him and they double take. This is a guy who's probably kind of used to young women doing double takes when they pass him. And he kind of beams for a second, but he also, I have to say, he lights up when he sees the women light up looking at him. But when they're gone, when they've passed him, he also kind of brings it back to neutral. So we haven't seen much of his backstory here yet, but I feel like there's something there that it's a little bit of a, I don't know that I want to say performance, but when the light is shining on him, it feels so bright, and when it is not, it feels so dark. And I just see this little like light switch happening for him, even just in this little moment in this scene. And for what it's worth, by the way, I should have looked up this actor's name. Sam Claflin plays Billy Dunn for most of this show. Because once we hit that age for him in this episode, we kind of stay there. When you first look at this actor who's playing the young Billy, a close up of him, I'm like, I don't know if I see exactly the resemblance. But when we started with him in the guitar shop and we pulled back, I was like, ooh, they really got a good likeness there. The hair helps, I think, as well. Okay, so Billy has got these groceries. He goes into his house. He greets his mom. His mom says he's still in the bedroom. Billy rolls his eyes. He's going to go upstairs to his brother, Graham, who is he's lying down on his bed. He's staring up at the ceiling. He's tormented by love. Billy says, come on, Peaches. She's just a girl. There will be others. Pause. This is not meant to be a spoiler, but did I completely forget? I've watched all the way through this series a bunch of times. Did I completely forget the use of the nickname Peaches for Graham? Has this been happening all this time and I missed it? Because he gets called Peaches a couple times in this episode, and I was like, wait, what? But here I am writing notes, making notes about dialogue. Peaches. Okay. I guess we'll find out if he is called Peaches in every single episode of this show. I don't know what to tell you about myself. Anyway, come on, Peaches. She's just a girl. There will be others. He sits down on Graham's bed, so they seem to be kind of close. Graham's like, how do you know? Billy says, because you're 14 years old and you can play the guitar. Trust me, you're going to have plenty of girlfriends someday. Fair. This is another variation of there are other fish in the sea. But I think it helps not to use that expression. So well done, Billy, on getting around it. But yeah, you can get a sense that there is a pretty strong bond between these boys. We are going to go from this to Warren's interview. He laughs. He was like, it was Graham's idea to start a band. We're going to get this adorable flashback. We're going to get Warren, Graham, Eddie, and Chuck running at a track in school. They're just doing a little jog in their little running uniforms. Young Eddie is like, where's this all coming from anyway? Warren teases he's trying to get his girlfriend back. So Graham's pulling something here. He's trying to make an idea happen. Graham protests. He says, "What? No, this is not about the girl." Eddie laughs. Graham's like, "It's not about that." Chuck says, "Oh, of course not." Graham says, "No, it's about doing something I love with my brother and my three best friends. And if girls just happen to notice," Warren heard that. He's like, "Wait, wait, wait, hold on. Back up. What did he say? They all stop running. They don't care about the girls." Chuck says, "Your brother?" And he's like, as in, Warren says, Billy Dunn is going to be in this band. Graham knows he got him and he runs off. Uh, it's so adorable, right? Like, you would think it would be the reverse here. You would think they'd be like, my brother's going to be here and they're going to be girls. And they'd be like, what? But uh, in a twist of my own expectations, they're like, he's probably in it for the girls. And I was like, no, my brother, like, and they're like, what? It's so good. I love this scene. I'm loving it more as I talk about it actually right now. It's so cute. Um, but it gives you this sense of how organic it is for Billy to be a leader here because they all have, do I want to say idolize? I mean, we don't know exactly how they all feel about him, but it stops traffic that his name is brought up as being a possible member of this band. This seals the deal for people to show up in this garage. Um, they're intrigued. They're intrigued by the mystical Billy Dunn. And Graham knows. Graham knows this was the tool, so he's smart. Okay, so we're gonna go to Billy's interview. He says, "Yeah, I never agreed to be in their band." And he laughs a little bit because somehow he got hosed by this too, but he wanted to be. Come on. We're going to cut to the band in a garage, which I assume is Chuck's, practicing. And it's hard to watch and listen to. And Billy is there observing, and you can feel him feeling that it's a train wreck. And he's like, oh, he's kind of wincing. Warren's like, one, two, three, four, like, and they're playing. They're doing their very best version of House of the Rising Sun. Eddie is singing lead. Billy is still doing the voiceover here, the interview voiceover. He says, I said I would listen, maybe give them some pointers. He didn't agree to be in the band. He said he'd give them pointers. We're watching Billy at this practice be very unimpressed, kind of uncomfortable about the amount of feedback he has for them. He says, stop, 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 stop. They've stopped playing. Billy turns to Eddie. He says, it's an E major, Chief. Okay. Eddie strums it. Great. You got the E major. Billy goes to Warren. He says, and you, Thundersticks. Warren's like, yes, very eager. Billy says, where'd you get those tree trunks? Warren says, they're my grandfather's. Billy's like, easy on those fills. Yeah. Warren nods. And we're going to get a close up on Billy here because now it feels like he's really taking some ownership. And so we get closer in on Billy and he's like, this isn't jazz. Again, from the top. He steps back to where he was. I actually feel like the energy that he brings to this isn't jazz is a little bit like what we hear from Rod Reyes later when he's talking to Graham. But he says, okay, again from the top. And still, Billy is not jumping in, but you know that it pains him to listen to this and not help in a more meaningful way. Graham says, hey, Billy, why don't you show us how it's done? Graham, master manipulator. Eh? Doing it for good, not for evil. But my goodness, is he effective? This kid knows. He knows how to get things done. He just sort of is strategic. I actually want to track this more as we go through these episodes because I don't know that I clocked how strategic he was as a youth until right now. So I'm curious to see how much of this we see as we get into the 70s. Okay, Billy is then going to look at Eddie because Graham just suggested, hey, why don't you show us how it's done? Billy looks at Eddie, who was currently playing lead. In Graham's interview, he says, I mean, I knew my brother. Yeah, master manipulator in the most lovely way. But Eddie's voiceover, he's like, by the second practice, he was basically in the band. And by the third, it was his fucking guy. And as we're watching this flashback, we see young Eddie just like looking kind of taken aback by the fact that Billy is jumping in to show him how it's done. Meaning, step in place of Eddie, take over lead. Um, I mean, it's no love lost here. I mean, I think young Eddie doesn't know what to do about all this, but older Eddie seems to have some feelings, right? Maybe some big ones. We're going to hear Jefferson Airplane song, 3/5 of a mile in 10 seconds. That's playing as we cut to another band practice because we've been told like he was in a couple practices and then he was in the band. We see Billy setting the microphone height for himself. He's taking charge, he's taking the lead. We are going to now go back to what's happening with Daisy. We're going to hear her voiceover. She says, I mean, what a time to be alive if you loved music. We're going to see her waiting in line at a club. We're going to see her in the club in a crowd, just in a throng of people. She says, I saw Cream at the Pack Center and Zeppelin at the Whiskey, snuck backstage for the Who at the Shrine. I was 15 years old and the whole world just seemed so beautiful and good. A couple things about this. First of all, I think the fact that here, still a young 15, she's still waiting in line. She's just one of the people waiting in line right now. But she's found a love for this. She says the whole world just seemed so beautiful and good, which, from what we've seen of Daisy's life to this point, it's only music that got her to that place, right? Because everything else seems kind of horrible. Here we have this shot, I think that's very telling. She's in I don't know if it's Sunday school or where she is right now, but she's with a whole bunch of girls all dressed the same way. They're all in church pews. Every other girl is praying, kneeling and praying, and Daisy is just staring out the window, smiling, thinking about music. We see her dancing to music in one of the clubs in slow motion. We see her look at the lead singer on stage. We see him look back at her, or maybe it was the reverse. He was already looking at her, and she looked and found him looking at her. Either way, um, there's eye contact going on here, and he tricks her off screen. My understanding here, based on the dialogue we get, is that he convinces her that there's a party happening in one of the hotel rooms. He's going to take her back to it. It's an exclusive party, but there's actually no party happening. So what we actually see is the singer letting 15-year-old Daisy into his hotel room. She's laughing, and then she looks around. There's nobody else there. She says, where is everybody? The music stops that we've been hearing, and the singer shuts the door. The door latches. Interview Daisy from, future older Daisy. She is speechless. Um, I'm not even going to call this date rape. This wasn't a date. She was just raped. Um, I mean, I imagine there was a sizable age difference here. Quite a position of power happening here. And she very simply was not going to the room for this purpose. She was there for a party. And so in this flashback, we're going to see Daisy looking stunned. She hasn't left the party yet, but she has left the hotel room. She's walking poolside. She's amidst a lot of people, so I suppose there's a little bit of safety in that for her, but she's sitting alone on a lounge chair. Beautifully lit shot because it's a pool party, and you can see, the reflection of the waves kind of lapping in her face, which I thought was really nice. I don't know what it looked like to get all these angles on the day, but it came off beautifully, I think. So she's sitting alone and she's watching as this singer who just assaulted her is chatting up a group of other women, ladies at this party, and the camera pushes in on her face and she's so vulnerable. So we got this like one moment of her feeling like this bliss. Like everything was so beautiful and good while she's sitting in this church thinking about music. And then here we are again, you know. Music did not always do her right, or musicians. Yes. Okay, so interview Daisy, older Daisy says, people say I was naive. I wasn't naive. I was a baby. She was attacked. Not her fault. Um, I mean, look, maybe older Daisy would not go into a room alone with a I mean, I don't know. She was told it was going to be a party. She didn't know. We're going to see this 15-year-old Daisy return home to her parents' house on this night. And her parents are having another party. This probably happens every week. I don't know how often, but it happens a lot. She's been crying. When she walks in, the only two people who notice her are a couple people by the door who do notice that she's not okay and do nothing about it. And she goes to her room to cry. She lies on her bed. Older Daisy, interview Daisy, says, I hated that feeling. So pathetic and weak, so helpless. We see 15-year-old Daisy. This seems like a very formative night for her. She had this trauma happen to her, and she goes into her room alone, and she turns to her nightstand. There's a journal on it, but an empty one. And she picks it up, and on the inside where it says, property of, she writes Daisy Jones. Interview Daisy says, I just didn't want to be that girl anymore. She didn't want to be the one who was pathetic and weak and helpless, is what she just described herself as. So actually in this moment, because we've been hearing her referred to as Daisy so far in the show, but we're going to hear her mom call her Margaret. So Daisy Jones, my assumption here is that this is the first time she takes the name Daisy or Daisy Jones. And she puts it in her journal. It's her songwriting pseudonym. Okay, we're going to cut back to 1970. I guess, is there anything else I want to say about that scene? I mean, it all just seems so formative for me with Daisy. Um, you know, to be totally alone so much of the time, to find music, to be around people still feeling alone, but then to find this deep love for it, and then to have a trauma happen in a music venue, well, a hotel, but in the setting of people in the music world. It's really complicated right now in Daisy's life. But with that, she turns to the creative outlet where she's going to start writing her own lyrics. And that's something, right? So it's just really a whole tangled mess for her right now. We go to 1970, and the Dunn brothers, they're going to run up onto the stage at an event in a backyard. One of the things that I did notice, I was trying to track what the Dunn brothers are wearing. I'm not going to be able to describe it mostly, but what I did notice is that in these early performances, they're all in the same outfits. And then as the episode progresses, they start to individualize a little bit more. So, like at this performance, in whoever's backyard this is, they've got their uniform of like, I think it's black jeans and white turtlenecks. Billy goes to the mic. He's like, Evening, we're the Dunn brothers. Eddie says, For now. Eddie's losing a lot of battles. No? Eddie, this is not how Eddie thought this was going to go. At one time, it was so cool to like Billy Dunn's gonna be in this band. I'm in. But he may be living to regret that right now. I don't know. We're the Dunn brothers for now. Warren's like, woo, and he starts playing drums. We're gonna get the opening notes of Susie Q. And, we'll see that they've done this song in a variety of different events. Warren's going to describe that for us. He says, we did 10 proms, 20 graduation parties. I mean, I don't even know how many Sweet 16s, he laughs. We're going to see them on stage at a bigger venue. Again, still playing Susie Q. It looks more like maybe a community center type of room. We're going to see a crowd cheering. Billy's singing here without a guitar. He's crooning at the mic. I mean, he's taking ownership of this lead singing role. He's got a sexy thing going on. The crowd is dancing. In Graham's interview here from, well into the future, he says the band was, it was just a distraction, an escape, He says, I mean, none of us that would have ever thought it would be anything more than that, not even Billy. And this is Graham's point of view. I wonder if Billy actually felt that way. This was Graham's point of view. But even in Graham's point of view, he considers this particular night a formative one. So we see the band, they're playing a wedding for Doug and Mary, whoever Doug and Mary are. They're wearing matching suits. They've upgraded because it's a wedding and you gotta be fancy, but they're still all wearing the same thing. And Billy coordinated this. In Graham's interview, he says, and then one night everything changed. We're going to go to this flashback. Billy, in 1970, he looks out into the audience as they're finishing up the final notes of Susie Q, and he freezes. He sees his dad dancing with a young woman and hitting on her. He's drunk. It's gross. The dad's like, damn, darling, truly, you can dance. She's cheering. She's drunk as well. Billy is distressed. We don't have exactly all the context at this moment for how many levels of distressed he is, but we know that he is. And he looks at Graham. They're both watching their dad, who's walking to the back of the room drunk with this woman, in his arms. Billy storms off the stage. He walks outside the venue into the parking lot. Graham chases him out. He's like, Billy. Billy says, he's supposed to be in Georgia, Graham. I'm going to come back to that point in a second. Graham says, well, he's not. All right. The rest of the band follows them outside. Graham's like, I bet he never even fucking left. Eddie says, what's wrong with you guys? Graham says, not now, Eddie. Warren calls to Billy. He's trying to smooth things over. He's definitely the smoother over of the group, you would say, if that were an expression people used. Warren says, you sound great tonight, man. Goes to Graham. He says, and you were fucking ripping it out there. What's going on? He's like, it can't be all that bad, but it is. Graham says, did you see the guy in there in a plaid suit? Warren says, who? The creepster with the comb over and the girl half his age? And he chuckles, not understanding how very cutting that actually is. And Graham somberly says, yeah, that's our dad. And now we're going to get interview Graham putting his spin on this. And he says, I mean, I was 4 when he left, so I never really had a father, but it was different for Billy. He worshipped the guy. I think I'm going to unpause that other thought from earlier here. So Billy's saying he was supposed to be in Georgia. Graham was 4 when his dad left. Billy, I'm trying to remember the age gap between these two. But under 10, I would presume here for Billy. So Billy had much more of a memory of his relationship with his dad. And I'm wondering, so he worshipped his dad, and I'm wondering what he understood about his dad maybe being in Georgia that was okay enough for him to still worship his dad. This might be a detail that I need to inspect further as we go through the episodes in case we get more information about this, because I'm trying to remember why was it an okay story in his head that his dad went to Georgia, and then it's disrupted by knowing he was actually very close to home. I get the offense at that, but he worshipped his dad, I guess, even when he was supposedly in Georgia. The alarming thing here is like seeing their dad having no communication from him, knowing that he was really close to them, and seeing him like be so gross and hitting on this woman. I mean, I guess there's a lot of levels of how gross this is. But you know what, folks? It gets worse. So Billy, in 1970, says to the group, I'm going to say something. And he starts to walk into the venue. Graham tries to stop him, but sort of doesn't, or he's not effective. Billy says, I have to. They go back inside the venue. Their dad is smiling creepily at this young woman. Billy approaches his dad. The woman walks away. She's like, I am out. I'm not interested in whatever this is. His dad says, "Can I help you?" Billy says, "Yeah, you know who I am?" His dad says, "Should I?" You know, sometimes in TV shows or movies that are about like parents and children separated or something, or siblings who were separated or twin, like there's this I don't know if I would call it a trope, but there's this thing that sometimes happens where they see each other, and in that moment, they just know they're family and they're connected. This is the opposite of that. His dad sees his sons, both of them, right next to each other. He's like, who are you? Um, or he does know who they are and he's just trying to get out of this situation. Either way, gross. Billy says, "Yeah, you should know me." His dad is smiling a little bit through being drunk. He says, "Well, then, of course I do." He looks at the stage. He says, "I'd recognize that guitar anywhere." So maybe he always recognized them and is just messing with them. And that makes you even worse. Every version of this makes you even worse, Mr. Dunn. Billy and Graham are going to look back at the guitar on stage, which suddenly is just gross. His dad says, "Anything else?" You're the worst, man. Okay? Uh, Also, Daisy's mother. Both of you, not good. Graham is going to pull Billy back physically. He's like, "Hey, he's not worth it. All right, let's go home." Billy needs to make a gesture of his own. He's going to go up onto the stage. He's going to grab this guitar. He's going to shove it into his dad's hands. He says, "Take it. Go on, take it." And then Sam Claflin, my goodness, I said, "Fucking take it." Whoa. I feel it directly from Sam. All right. Billy got right into my soul with the "I said fucking take it." His dad says, "I've got no use for it. I gave it to you. Something to remember me by." Who wants to remember this man by this guitar now? Not Billy. Billy is going to make that very clear by smashing the guitar repeatedly. He says, "There you go, asshole." Billy storms off. For some reason, he pushes Chuck. Chuck was just in the way, I guess. I mean, Chuck definitely was just there. He did nothing wrong in this situation. Billy, like, just he needs to hit or attack or push something. Chuck is there. The crowd is murmuring. And Graham, just when you think maybe he was going to take the high road, he did, after all, say he's not worth it, man. No, he punches his dad, just slugs him. The crowd gasps. The band leaves. Billy is walking outside trying to calm himself down in the parking lot. The band joins him. Warren's like, "Well, I guess we're not getting paid for that gig, huh?" The smoother over. Eddie is going to look at Billy. He's like, "You okay, man?" I mean, it's a lot when Eddie's trying to comfort Billy. Interview Graham from present day, from the future. I don't know. I need to sort out how I'm referring to these time periods. Maybe maybe I say future because so much of this show is going to happen in the 70s. Um, so future will be the interview folks. Interview Graham is like, you know, I can still see that look on Billy's face. I mean, the moment this thing became real. So this was an inciting moment that then led to a bonding between this band. Billy in the flashback says, "Okay, guys, come here, come here." They crowd around him. He says, "You're my brothers. I love you. We work hard. We stick together. We're going to be the biggest fucking band in the world someday. Do you trust me?" Eddie says, "Hell yeah." Warren's like, "You kidding me, man?" He chuckles. They do a group hug. We're going to hear a pre-lap of the song "Bang a Gong, Get It On" by T-Rex. Um, and, inter- and Billy, in an interview from the future, says, "I really believed it too." We see him. He says, "Even before I met Daisy, he believed it." So, I mean, of course, given that this band is going to be called Daisy Jones and the Six, we certainly know that Daisy is a very pivotal part of this band's success. But Billy had this belief. He felt really bonded to these people. And I think anybody in this band would probably argue that this was an important night. I debate whether Graham is accurate about thinking that it wasn't more important to Billy before this. Because he seemed to think that Billy could sort of take it or leave it, that it wasn't that big a deal. I think it was a big deal to Billy before this, but it took on a more personal resonance after this situation happened with his dad. Okay. We're hearing this song Bang a Gong, Get It On. We pan through Daisy's room. We're going to see her posters. She's got Joe Cocker. She's got Make Love, Not War with a peace sign made of flowers. We're going to see now Riley Keough's Daisy. This is the Daisy we'll know pretty much for the rest of the show. She's looking in the mirror. And, we keep kind of getting rooted back to as they continue to age up her character, because we've seen three Daisies, they keep having us, they place us in her bedroom and looking in her mirror. And we don't really need that because she's so distinctive and her hair is so distinctive. We don't really need all of those signals, but it helps. So she smiles looking into the mirror. She takes the bottle of pills out of the drawer. She's going to go to the troubadour. She's going to go right up to the bouncer and she's going to skip the line. So at this point in Daisy's life, she is a regular. She's a known entity at these clubs. She's cracked the code. She's figured it out. She's not waiting in line. She's cutting the line. She's hugging. She goes up to the bouncer. She's like, "Hey, Mikey." She hugs him. He lets her in. She doesn't have to go around the back and hope somebody leaves the door open for her when she bums a cigarette from them. Nope, she gets right in. We're going to see another night. We see her drinking from a bottle on the street. We see her snorting cocaine. We see her taking a drag at a party and laughing. She consumes substances is what she does. She's gotten to that place. And I have to say, she's a person who seems like she's had a fair amount of pain in her youth and no outlets. She's got music, but she keeps that to herself too. That's all very internal. So, uh, am I really surprised to see her substance use here? Not really. And it would seem that it's very available to her. Daisy, we're going to see her sitting with Wyatt Stone, a character we're going to come to hate. And or at least in this episode. And we're going to see them sitting with a group at the bar, in a booth at a bar. He holds out a pill to her. Daisy, in her interview in the future, says, "Was I out of control?" We see her in the flashback, like, what does it do? Why, it's like, I don't know. Daisy says, "Was I out of control?" Probably. And we see flashback Daisy from the 70s. She takes the pill from Wyatt and just swallows it. I don't care what it does. I'm just going to take it. Her voice, the interview voiceover that she's giving, she says, "But I was writing too." Like it wasn't just escaping, it was also writing. She says, which felt even better than drugs. Like I'd found a piece of me that I didn't know was missing. Okay, so there's that. That's good news. We now we're going to see interview Daisy. She says, "I couldn't imagine a better feeling." We're going to cut from there. We're going to pan across Daisy's room where we see Daisy's mom in it reading her journal, and this is not authorized. Some more things that I was able to make out in this room. We've got posters, Jim Morrison, we've got Mick Jagger posters. A touch that you see in a lot of different shots here is she's got lamps and she always puts like scarves or like a light material over it so it throws different light into the room. This feels like something Daisy would do. Daisy enters the room and sees her mom reading her journal without her permission. She says, "What are you doing? These are private. You don't just come into somebody's room and go through their things." She grabs the journal out of her mom's hands. Her mom has also grabbed something of her own from the room. She has a stack of records that she's pulled out of Daisy's room. She says, "Well, these are mine." She walks away with them. She's walking out of the room. Her dad is watching this from the door, saying nothing. These people, they're the worst. I don't know who's worse. Them? Billy's dad? I don't know. Um, Daisy says, "Mom, she's just, you know, after all of this maybe breaks my heart more than anything." Daisy says, "Mom." Her mom and dad look back at her from the doorway. She says, "Are they any good?" Or because nobody's seen these before. And her mom just sort of violated her and stole them. Like, not stole them, violated her and read them. "Are they any good?" Her mom walks up to her. She touches her hair and she says, "You're a pretty girl, Margaret." Let's unpack this, shall we? First of all, are the songs good? You're a pretty girl. Answer, no. Um, it's a way to deflect the conversation that isn't even necessary here because her songs are good. We're going to find to some degree she's got talent. But her mom doesn't want to give her that. So are they any good? You're a pretty girl, Margaret. Also, you know, Jonah, the journalist earlier, when describing Daisy's mom, commented on her mom's beauty. And so that would appear to be the thing that her mom values above all other things. Also, inside the front cover of this journal, this is the property of Daisy Jones, and her mom has called her Margaret, rejecting the persona of Daisy Jones, the only persona we have come to know so far. And her mom saying, no, 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 that's not who you are. You don't get to be this. There's a lot in there. And, you know, these were the things that Daisy had never been able to speak. How many times has her mom found a way to say to her, nobody wants to hear you? Nobody wants to hear your voice. Yet another way. Even in writing, her mom doesn't want to hear it, but she was reading it. She sought it out. This feels so personal. I'm getting angry about her mom. Her mom is so mean. Daisy's heart breaks. She honestly really set herself up for this because this was how her mom was going to respond. Somewhere inside, she knew it. Um, but her mom, when given another opportunity to say anything nice at all, uh, says something not nice or just doesn't go there. And you can see how much that hits Daisy in this moment. So Daisy's going to be walking alone on the sidewalk. She sees a sign outside of a bar that says piano inside. It's next to this establishment. And she just sort of looks at the door. And from what we see later in this episode, I would assume she continued walking and did not go inside in this moment. But inside another building, we've got a laundromat, a public establishment that a couple other characters are going to be in. We need to meet Camila. Billy is doing laundry, and so is Camilla. She's across the room. She's reading, but she looks at him and he looks back at her. He sees that, he smiles. And once again, you know, like when we saw young Billy carrying the groceries earlier in this episode, and we saw those two girls notice him, and he beamed when he was in their presence, and then he, you know, the light faded as they walked away. And here's Camilla, and she's noticing him. And once again, he's like, you know, that's meant to trigger some sort of a positive feeling in him. She comes a little closer to him. She says, excuse me, sorry, are you? Billy's like, I am. Yeah, Billy Dunn. Pleasure to meet you. He shakes her hand. She's like, yeah. Uh, I was just going to say, are you using that basket? She points. He says, oh, no, I'm not. He hands it to her. He says, there you go. She's cool, thanks. He's very caught off guard by this person not knowing who he is, or, you know, he thinks he's hot stuff, but this is kind of putting him in his place a little bit. He says, so you don't know who I am? That's definitely the worst way to continue this conversation, but he's just so caught off guard. She says, should I? He says, well, I'm in a band. She says, cool. He really doesn't know what to do with this. Are you kidding me? He's like, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. It's happening. Like, so that person doesn't know who I am. She says, what? He says, no, it's just some people know me is all. And I saw you looking over. And Camila holds her ground here. She just looks confident. Even though we're going to find out she's being a mastermind and strategic here, she's playing a little bit of a game with him. But by pretending she doesn't know him, it's really flustered Billy. And he's like, you know what? Never mind. It's fine. And he laughs. We're going to see interview Camila from the future, who's listed as a photographer. Her name is Camila Alvarez. She's in some sort of a living room I'm not able to make out all of the different types of rooms that people are in. Some of them look like they could just be like rooms in a hotel or something where you interview a person. But she seems to be in a living room here. She's got, it's like, of course I knew who he was. Are you kidding me? Every girl in Hazelwood knew Billy Dunn, and not just because he was in some band. But here we are back in the laundromat. Camilla says, "So what's a big rock star like you doing in the neighborhood fluffing fold?" He says, "Honestly, she probably knows the answer to this as well." She's really, really putting him in his place. He's like, honestly, he's putting coins in kind of uncomfortably. He's like, my mom's washer dryer broke. She's like, wow, that's really sweet of you helping your mom out like that. That you must be a good son. He's like, well, it's kind of my washer dryer too. Carol says, right, because you still live with your mother. She takes the basket. They're both laughing. She's kind of starting to walk away. He's like, it's going great for me, isn't it? She says, she walks away. He's catching up with her. He's like, okay, all right. What can I do to turn this around? She's like, I don't think there's much you can do. He says, no? Okay, well, how about this? You give me your number and I'll write you a song. She says, wow, has that line ever worked? He laughs. He's like, you tell me it's the first time I'm using it. Which, if this were a line that you use, you would also say that next if somebody like poked you on it. Um, but here we are. Uh, this first interaction between Billy and Camilla, I just, she's so effective at like elevating her status in this situation and ignoring his while fully knowing what his status is. And that's pretty much the only way that you can get Billy's attention, it would seem. So here it is. She's found it. But you know who else's attention she's had? Eddie's. So interview Eddie from the future. He says, I knew Camilla from the neighborhood. We used to walk to Sunday school together when we were kids. You couldn't help but fall in love with her even then. We're going to get the opening notes of Have Love Will Travel here. Eddie says, and then she met Billy. There's always, I feel like in all of these, especially his interviews in this opening episode and maybe throughout the series, I don't know. There's always like this dun 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 sort of feeling with Eddie. He's like, yeah, you couldn't help but fall in love with her. Read, I love her. But you know, then she met Billy. I was the lead singer, and then Billy came along. Like it's all kind of like that for Eddie. Ugh, poor guy. Okay, so we're gonna hear the Dunn brothers playing Have Love Will Travel. We're gonna see a montage from the band practicing. We're gonna see that Camila's been watching them. She takes pictures, she films them. She's been spending a bunch of time with this band. Time passes, seasons pass. They are now wearing warmer clothing in this garage. So, you know, the relationship has continued and she's been spending time with this band. I would like to thank this rewatch for correcting my understanding of what this song was, because I didn't know this song before. Um, the Dunn Brothers, it's Have Love Will Travel. Uh, I was sure. I never questioned that Billy was singing the word trouble where we have the word travel. So, thank goodness I'm now corrected from this. It helps to be able to actually read the lyrics as I'm going through the script here. So, yes, Have Love Will Travel. Okay, so Warren is saying for that next year, it felt like all we did was practice. If my hands were red and raw by the time I got to bed, I knew it was a good day. We're going to see Billy being the taskmaster at these practices. He's like, let's go again. And they're playing again, but we're still just hearing the song in one shot. Warren says, we had a lot of good days back then. Warren, always looking at the glass half full. We're going to see the relationship between Billy and Camilla has gotten more and more serious. He shows up with flowers at Camilla's door. He's going to join in on a family dinner. He's going to meet the parents. And it looks like two sisters as well. She comes out of the house to have a private conversation with him because she's like, this man does not look the way I wanted him to look. This is serious. He says, hey, she says, please tell me you at least brought the tie I picked out. He says, I got the tie. I got the tie. She puts it on him. She's like, you're a mess. He's like, what? And she says, your button isn't even done. And she's fixing him up and they kiss. So it's gotten serious. They love each other and but he's meeting the parents for the first time. So we're gonna see dinner with the family and it doesn't go well. Billy says to Camilla's dad, you have a beautiful home, sir. And her dad just grunts and cuts his meat. Yipes. Billy's kind of wide-eyed. Um, Her dad was predisposed not to like Billy, probably for a lot of different reasons. Maybe, even though Camilla pretended not to know who Billy was when she first met him, maybe news about Billy has made its way to her dad, and he's not interested in this. So yeah, he grunts and cuts his meat. Billy's wide-eyed. Camilla's mom says, Camilla tells us you work in the steel mill. He's like, well, yeah, I do, but it's just temporary, you know? Camilla's mom like, oh. She looks at the dad. Camilla says, Billy's a musician. Dad looks at mom like, it's happening. Billy says, yeah, I'm in a band called the Dunn Brothers. Camilla's like, they're really good. Her dad just grimaces, not helping. But the truth hurts, you know? This is it. What else is he supposed to say? Billy says, yeah, I mean, we're working hard at it. We're practicing as much as we can. We're playing gigs every night. Dad says, and this pays the bills. Billy blinks a little bit. He's like, well, not exactly. Camilla says with confidence, it will. Billy says, yeah, it will. Her parents nod, fully not believing that it ever will. I mean, they don't want this. I mean, we don't get the conversation that happens after Billy leaves, but I think we can all imagine what conversation happens after Billy leaves. They don't want this relationship. Um, Interview Graham from the future says, I never doubted it for a second, but not everybody felt the same. The never doubting it is this idea that they would be able to pay the bills, that they'd be able to be successful. So we're going to see the next non-believer, the new van that Warren got for the group. It pulls up to Chuck's house. The garage is closed. This is the garage they always practice in. Chuck is outside on the steps. The guys get out of the van. They greet him. Billy looks at him skeptically. He's like, why is the garage door closed, man? Chuck says, look, I don't know how to say this. I'm just going to say it. I got into college. Warren's like, all right. Graham says, bro, we didn't even know you applied. You didn't even tell us about that. Warren's stammering. He's like, well, so was this before or after I spent all my money on this van? It's like, man, you've been keeping secrets. Chuck says, I know, I'm sorry. They have a really good dental program. Billy shakes his head. His arms are crossed. And he has a tone, but he's keeping it level. He's like, so what, you're going to be a dentist now? Chuck says, I don't know. I guess so. Billy approaches him. He comes closer. The rest of the band kind of follows behind him. He says, Chuck, come on. I mean, all right, please don't do this. All right. Not now. Right not when things are starting to happen. Chuck's like, what do you mean just starting to happen? Billy says, dude, we open for the Winters on Thursday. And that's just the beginning. He's got this like calm negotiation voice happening, but under the surface, he's either seething or freaking out. It's one of the two. Chuck says, this is a real opportunity, this dentist thing. Billy says, so is this. Chuck says, Billy, I know this is your dream, man, but just because you want something to happen doesn't mean it's going to. Do you really think there's a future here? Billy says, well, yeah, Chuck, I do. Chuck says, you're out of your fucking mind. Chuck walks up the stairs. He goes inside the house. And given the way this episode started, we might imagine that Chuck will come to regret this choice. I don't know. Maybe he's a very happy dentist. But he did not play at Soldier Field. Okay. I love the dig we get from Warren as like sort of the button on this. Uh, Warren is just resigned. He's like, great cardigan, Chuck. Very dentist-like. I mean, I also noticed the cardigan. It's something. Okay. Eddie is like, well, we've got to cancel the gig, this opening for the winter situation. But he's like, no, man, we're not canceling. I was like, yeah, well, what are we going to do? We don't have a bassist. Billy says, we're not canceling. He thinks, he looks at Eddie. He says, Eddie, you switch over to bass. And he's like, no. Resistance was futile. How many battles has Eddie won here? I think so far it's like what? Eddie zero, Billy seven. I don't know. It's been a lot. It's a very skewed ratio here. They all look at Eddie. They kind of need Eddie to be a bassist. Eddie sighs. For how long? Billy's like, thanks, man. We owe you. I love this choice. I don't know if this was a choice from Sam Claflin or if this was written into the script. He says, thanks, man. We owe you. He, he goes to Eddie. He sort of slaps him on the face and pats his chest. But it wasn't exactly a loving pat. It was like, I want one of these. And he keeps walking. It was like, I don't know that that was affectionate. There's a little bit of a charge between these two. There's just always like that. I'm putting you in your place, man. Stay where you are. Um, yeah. They all get back in the van. Eddie is disgruntled. You know, Eddie's disgruntled. That's just how Eddie is. Can you blame him? He wanted something, he's not getting it. Okay, we're gonna hear the song Different Drum by Stone Ponies playing. Daisy is singing along in the shower. Well, she's singing along to it in the shower. We are more hearing her voice. Wyatt Stone is also hearing this. He knocks, he opens the bathroom door. He's maybe never heard her sing before. She doesn't reveal that part of herself. He's like, you've got some serious pipes on you, girl. How did I not know that about you? She says, I'll be out in a second. Oops. She didn't really mean to share that with him. He shuts the door. He goes into her bedroom. He grabs the guitar and her journal and he starts trying out her lyrics. Her lyrics to the song she wrote, Stumbled on Sublime. She does not write, she just writes lyrics. So he doesn't know how the song goes. He just knows the lyrics she wrote. So he's singing his version, Stumbled on Sublime until the signal's weak. Stumbled on Sublime until you can't speak. She stumbled on Sublime. Daisy comes out of the bathroom. She's in her robe. She takes the journal from him. She sits on the bed. She's like, please don't look at that. Wyatt says, you know, these, they're not half bad. You've got, she starts singing Stumble on Sublime again. He's singing it wrong. She hates that he's singing it wrong. She hates that he's singing it at all. He says, she's all around your head, dancing at the edges of your mind. Daisy says, it doesn't go like that. It's like, well, how does it go? So she inhales sharply against her better judgment. She sings it. She sings how she hears it. She's all around your head. She's dancing in the corners of your mind. Stumbled on Sublime until you can't speak. Stumbled on Sublime until the signal's weak. He says, sing that again. She says, no. He says, come on. You said something like something out there with the. She said, I don't remember. You're gonna have to write your own fucking song. And they get playful and they giggle and they're kissing. But this is actually a big problem. Raise your hand if you ever started out with something being playful and then realized this was actually a big problem. um, maybe I haven't had this particular situation happen. Maybe you haven't had this particular situation happen. But how many times was there something that kind of seemed cute and you kind of laughed it off, and then like months down the road, you're like, yeah, that was the red flag that I ignored. Right. Wyatt Stone. Um, You know, I guess it's better than not having seen the red flag at all, because then how do you know that you'll see it next time and know to avoid it? But here it was. Um, so we're going to get interview Daisy from the future, her voiceover. She's saying, and the worst part is that I let him take that song from me. We're watching them kiss, and we're hearing her voice. I mean, that's how little I thought of myself at the time. Then we see interview Daisy. She says, thank God I met Simone when I did. So we're getting an influence now to add to Daisy's life that hopefully is going to feel rich and rewarding for us, because it's been rough for Daisy so far. We're going to get an interview with Simone, who's listed as disco pioneer. She's in, I don't know, is it some sort of like a posh lounge? Is she like in a green room of a venue? Or it looks like a nice space. She looks really like I don't know, what's the word I want? She looks very Like, she's meticulous. Her hair is like curly and beautiful, and she just looks so polished here in this future interview. The interviewer says, Daisy says you changed your life. Do you remember how you met? Simone, she smiles and she leans back. Something that I think is really interesting about this character is how much sort of poise she has. And she's also, there's so much unsaid with Simone. Simone really, it feels like this is a character who thinks a lot of thoughts and you can see them. You can see them running through her head, but she doesn't speak them aloud. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is she actually thinking? All the time. And it happens right here. She sort of smiles and she leans back. Then we're going to flash back to a party in the hills. Um, there's this beautiful view, and Simone and Daisy are talking in front of this gorgeous view. Simone has straight hair. Simone's voiceover, she says, we were at some party in the hills, I think, and I just finished performing at Gazari's, so she must have seen me there. She knew everything about me. They're talking in a very animated way. We switch over to the interview with Simone. She says, in fact, she knew everything about everything. You know, she's finally getting a chance to like communicate with somebody in a way like we haven't really seen her be this animated. At the party, Daisy says, so he gets this idea that he can swim from one neighbor's pool to the next, which sounds totally crazy, but in the context of the film, it makes someone's like, what's your name again? Hold on. Daisy says, Daisy, I'm a huge fan of yours. She's a little confused and she says what she's thinking. I don't know what you're doing though, singing back up for Penny fucking Richardson. And then Penny approaches. She's like, there you are. I was looking for you, to Simone. And Daisy freezes. She's like, Penny fucking Richardson. Maybe it's a little bit of a big deal. Penny's like, excuse me? Daisy stretches out her hand to shake Penny. She's like, Daisy Jones, huge fan. Penny touches Simone's elbow. She says, let's get out of here. I'm tired. Simone says, Penny, we talked about this. Penny's like, well, no, you talked. And you know what, Simone? I'm fucking done. This is a bit of an intense quarrel, no? For a backup. I mean, look, uh, what's this, right? How's Simone back up for Penny Richardson? What kind of vibe are we getting here? I don't know. I could be talked either way into there's something here or there's not something here. Simone says to Daisy, would you excuse me just 1 second? Daisy says, yeah, sure. And we're going to see Simone and Penny have they step aside and they have this little argument with each other. It's very quick. And Simone comes back to Daisy and brushes her hair off her shoulder. Like one of those. She says, it's not what you think. What were we thinking? Daisy's like, all I think is that you're way too cool for that chick. Simone smiles. They both smile. Like, that was a good answer. Simone's voiceover, she says, we started talking and we never stopped. We're going to see they've now moved to a new location. They're going to Simone's apartment. Daisy and Simone get out of the car in front of Simone's apartment. They go inside. Simone's like, okay, this apartment, it's temporary. When the album comes out, I'll buy a place in the hills, 2 stories. Daisy's like, you didn't tell me you were recording an album. Simone's like, mm-hmm. Daisy says, no more singing backup then. Simone says, I sure as hell hope not. She gestures for Daisy to go inside. Inside the apartment, Daisy's looking at Simone's records. Simone's like, you sing, Daisy? Daisy says, no, not really. I mean, we've heard that she does. Simone looks at her knowingly like, I think that's a lie. Daisy says, I just took piano lessons as a kid, but I'm in love with this record. Based on what we're going to hear from her later, she's really underselling it. She can play piano and she can sing. Daisy's chosen Carole King's Going Back to play, and Daisy's going to join Simone on the couch. Simone's like, okay, well, what do you love about this album? Daisy says, I mean, she wrote all these songs for other people. Up on the Roof, Pleasant Valley Sunday, One Fine Day, and they're all great songs, but this is different. Simone nods. She's agreeing with it. Like, this is really resonating for Simone. She's like, I mean, she chose to sing these songs in her own voice because they meant something to her. It's just personal, Simone's nodding. Simone says, that's you, isn't it? I've seen you too. Gazari's, the whiskey. all over the strip. Most of them girls are just there for drugs and sex and stories to tell their friends, but not you. You're there for the music. I've seen you. The question is, she leans in, what are you doing in the crowd and not on that stage where you want to be? Daisy sighs. As Simone is sharing, I want to stop down on this scene for a little bit. I love this scene. Um, as Simone is saying, like all the places that she's seen Daisy, we can watch as it registers on Daisy's face that she's been seen. How many places has she been where people didn't want to see her, where people didn't notice her at all, where people used her? Simone's been clocking her. She's observed her. She's been a fixture here. Um, it means a lot to Daisy that Simone remembers her from these places and that she sees how much Daisy is keeping to herself, how much Daisy is hiding. I actually feel like these two characters, in many ways, their story that we're tracking in this first episode is starting in the same place. Yes, Simone is further along. She's got more irons in the fire here for her career. But I feel from Simone that she's thinking all these things and not saying them. And she's singing backup for somebody else on somebody else's songs, but aspires to write an album that isn't out there yet. Her voice is also not being heard. Daisy's been told nobody even wants to hear her voice at all. She's withholding it in many ways from the world, in a very active, conscious choice of a way. And so I don't know. I feel like both of these two people have a lot to say that they're not saying for various reasons, and they see it in each other. It's a mirror for each other, and they can connect at least on that point. And that's a bond. I think it's a really beautiful scene where they're both able to go like, I see something in you. And maybe they haven't heard that very much, and they both probably need it. That's my take on this. But I would love to know, I would love to know people's thoughts on this Daisy Simone dynamic here. Okay, let's switch over to this, the band, Eddie, Billy, the whole crew. They're about to open for the Winters. So first they're going to sound check. Eddie opens the door of this club and they walk in during the Winters sound check. It's the biggest venue they've played in. I mean, it's the fanciest, most official place they've played. They're very impressed. They're just like, wow, look at this. Camila's like, can you believe this? She throws her arms around Billy. They're all amazed at the venue except Graham. Graham is amazed, but by something else. By Karen, the keyboardist from the Winters. His eyes go wide and they stay wide for the rest of this scene. The Winters are singing this song. It's got this like, uh, I don't know what the term is in music when you're dancing and you do something not full out, you'd call it marking the dance. It seems like the band is sort of just like playing this sort of halfway, but it's got this really ethereal quality to it. This song, it's like this sort of like held back ethereal quality. And they're singing How to Spot an Angel in the Snow. I will show you something true if you really want me to. And there's Karen. Oh, the light shining on her. Warren sees Graham's look. He's like, keep dreaming, Peaches. I guess he's Peaches, huh? He nudges Graham. He makes a smooching sound. Graham's had enough of this. Graham pushes Warren away. And then after the winter sound check is done, and now it's time for the Dunn brothers to prep, the bands pass each other. Warren's like, hey, you guys were rocking up there. And he's like, you sounded good. Graham hangs back a second. He has one particular person he wants to talk to. He says to Karen, you sounded great up there. She says, thanks, man. So casual. Graham's like, I'm Graham. She says, Karen. She's walking away, but she turns back. She says, you know of a good place to get a bite around here, Graham? Graham says, you're not going to stick around? Check us out. It's going to be a good show. Karen's like, maybe next time. Graham nods. He says, all right, try Pepe's. It's right around the corner, best burger in town. He lost that battle, but he's so taken with this Karen. She is going to leave, and we're going to hear the opening notes of Have Love Will Travel. Not trouble, travel. Um, that song is playing again. They're playing the song, and we're going to see the Dunn brothers on stage that night. They are wearing different outfits from each other now. They've escalated. They've got their own individual style. They're look, I mean, they're close cousins of each other, I think, what they're wearing, but you they've got their own looks. We are going to see Rod Reyes in the crowd. He is bopping along. Uh, Karen is there after all. Um, and even though they're opening for Karen, but she's out in front, she's listening to them. She sits next to Rod and lights her cigarette. Karen and Rod are actually talking with each other, so they know each other. And we can't hear what they're saying, but they know each other. We're going to find out in a second in this interview that Rod Reyes is labeled as tour manager in his interviews. So are the winners on tour and Rod is managing them, or is Rod here checking out the show? Um, and um, Karen happens to know him, or who he is. I feel like maybe he's their tour manager because why would he be here? Um, but anyway, uh, I would love to tell you about Rod's interview next. But first, I just want to say, look, I when we talk about like male actors that I just really, really enjoy, like maybe even, well, really enjoy, Timothy Oliphant and Sam Claflin are like all the way up on my list, right? Are they numbers one and two? I don't know. They're very high on my list. When I saw that both of those humans were in this show, I almost didn't know what to do with myself. And when they have scenes together, it's magic for me. Give me Timothy Oliphant scenes anytime you can. I'm happy, right? So there's going to be a lot of love for Timothy Oliphant and Sam Claflin here on this podcast. And I'm not saying you can't have another opinion on it. I'm just saying I'm gonna be a fan. Okay. So all right, look, we're gonna get an interview with Rod Reyes, tour manager, who is in this is one of the interviewees who I feel like is in some sort of a like where is he? Is he in like a green room of us or like in a hotel and they found a private meeting room or something? That's what it looks like. The man's wearing a full-on scarf inside. I mean, he's so distinct. Okay, Rod's interview. He says, put Mick Jagger in a lineup, and a person who's never heard of the Rolling Stones could still point to Jagger and say, that one, he's the rock star. Billy Dunn had that in spades. So we're going to see um, in the flashback, we're going to see Rod now having a conversation with Billy and Graham after their set. And Rod is talking to Billy. The rest of the band is not there, but Rod's sort of facing Billy, and Graham's sort of just there off to the side. Rod says, obviously, you got to write your own material. Billy says, well, I mean, I do. Most of it's not good enough yet. He's just being very honest. Rod says, well, what are you writing about? Billy says, I have this one song called Nevermore about the Cattonville Nine. Rod groans. He's like, no. Oh my God. Are you Bob Dylan? Are you Buffy St. Marie? Billy sits up. He's like, Rod's like, enough with the political shit. He's got a cigarette dangling out of his mouth. He's like, it's a new decade. No one needs reminding that the world is a mess. People want to feel good again. They want to feel hope. You can write a love song, can't you? Future Billy in an interview, he's just sort of squints. He's like, Rod had a lot of ideas. Apparently, not everybody thinks Rod has great ideas. We're going to see a flashback to Rod. Now he's talking to Graham, still in this same trio. I love this so much. I love Timothy Oliphant. Rod says to Graham, you need to cool it with the solos, brother. Nobody cares about your technical guitar skills. They want to sing. They want to dance. Those lines, that delivery, I mean, my heart, it cracks me up. And Graham just like doesn't even know what hit him. Like, is it a truth bomb or is it just Rod's ideas? I don't know. It might be a truth bomb. So funny. We're gonna get interview Karen from the future. It says Karen Circo, keyboard. Rod told me to wear low-cut shirts. I told Rod to eat shit, and that was that. Are all Rod's ideas good? Not according to Karen. Like, Rod's not the authority on everything. You can make your own decisions if you need to as an artist. Um, I really like that pairing too, like the like because Rod's so like effusive. They want to sing, they want to dance, and then Karen just deadpans it to the camera. It's so good. I love those two back to back right there. Rod in the flashback, he's like, okay, the last thing I'll say, and this is key, and Billy leans in. Rod says, you need to get the fuck out of Pittsburgh. You want to be signed to a label and you want to work with Jimmy Miller, Tom Dowd, Teddy Price. Billy's like, you know Teddy Price? Rod's like, yeah, man, I know everybody. They're all in LA, not London, not New York, California, my friend. That's the place you got to be. Billy's taking that in. He's processing that. He gives it a moment's thought. Graham looks at Billy. Billy looks at Graham. Okay, I guess they're moving to California, right? So we're now going to cut to the whole band being huddled outside the venue. Eddie's like, I'm in. Billy smiles, like, yeah. Graham says, yeah, me too. Eddie smiles, like, yes. Warren says, well, I guess I better gas up the van then. And then we look over at Billy. Billy's about to squeal with excitement. Warren's like, you think she'll make it? They laugh, excited. The van, I think, is what they're talking about. Eddie is like, I think she's going to make it. Camila approaches. She says, what are you guys talking about? Awkward. Oops. We forgot about Camila. Warren's like, So now we're going to see the conversation between Billy and Camila, where he just reveals he made a decision without even talking with her about it. They're talking on her stoop in front of her house. She's upset. She's turned away from him. He's like, you could come with us. She's like, and do what? Follow you around? I have a job, Billy. I'm going to school. And I can't just follow some boy across the country. But he's like, some boy? She's, well, yeah. He's like, so I'm not some boy. She says, well, what is this then? Billy reaches for Camila. He tries to sort of cradle her head. This isn't it, Billy. You got it wrong. He's like, come here, come here. She's like, no. She gets up. She walks away. He says, so that's it then? It's just over? She looks back. She says, you still owe me that song, Billy Dunn. She goes into her house and she cries. And her mom finds her. She's like, Camila, I think this is really interesting, actually. Some of this conversation is in Spanish and some of it is in English. Her mom says, Camila. Camila says in Spanish, she's moving away. Her mom says in Spanish, she's hugging Camila. She's consoling her. She's smoothing her hair, but really secretly she's going, yes. Her mom in Spanish says, I'm sorry, my love. Maybe this is a blessing. Reed, I always hated him. I never liked him. You were always too good for him. He was always a musician who couldn't pay the bills. But she just says, I'm sorry, my love. Maybe this is a blessing. Camila says in Spanish, he asked me to go with him. Her mom says in Spanish, where? Camila says, California. Her mom says, California? And in Spanish, she says, you can't. Your family is here. Camila says in English, I know, I know, I know. Her mom says in Spanish, nothing more important than that. You never turn your back on your family. Camila says in English, you did. Her mom freezes and Camila holds her gaze. Oh, snap. I don't think I've clocked that line in previous watches, and I'm trying to remember if we will see more about what that meant later. And I'm not spoiling anything because I can't remember. The Nothing is more important than that. You never turn your back on your family. Camila says you did in English. In English. I mean, it's like, wow. That was intense. Okay. What happened? Okay. Billy is being interviewed in the future. He says, it's not enough just to meet the right person. You have to meet them at the right time as well, which is a little bit of a misdirect that's going to be like corrected in just a second. Because the guys are like literally a second, because the guys are getting in the van, or they're in the van. It's raining. Eddie is working on fixing some stuff on the roof. of the van. He says, it's getting dark, guys. Let's get a move on. And Camilla comes up. She says, got room for one more? Like the way that interview from Billy made it seem like maybe that was just the end of the relationship, which clearly it wasn't because Camilla's being interviewed in the future. So, um, but Camilla says, got room for one more? They're all happy. Eddie nods, is like, Camilla's coming, but she runs straight into the arms of the Billy in the van. Bill's like, you sure about that? She says, mm-hmm. He says, you're coming? She says, mm-hmm. They kiss. Ah, Eddie. Ready. We are going to see Daisy filling up her gas tank. She's sitting on the trunk of her car. Another car pulls up the gas station, playing a song very loudly on the radio. And it is what? What is it? Stumbled on Sublime by Wyatt Stone. That guy. Daisy's eyes go so wide. Her interview voiceover we start to hear here. Stumbled on Sublime was number one for what, 4 straight weeks? And then we're going to see her being interviewed. And that son of a bitch claims he wrote the whole fucking song. And this was becoming a pattern. We're now going to see cut back to her dating some other guy, Gary. And she's at this diner with him. And Daisy says, okay, see, I took a Benny to wake up this morning. So then if I just have the coffee, I'll be way too amped. Hence the champagne. He laughs. She's like, I call it an up and a down, or an up and down. Gary chuckles, very clever of her. He says, that's funny. I'm going to use that in a script one day. Oh, are you, Gary? You've messed with the wrong woman. Daisy says, what makes you think I'm not going to use that in a something one day? She kind of squints at him. Gary is on very dangerous ground right now and isn't even smart enough to know it. Gary says, I meant that as a compliment. There's no need to be cross. You'd be like, he looks at her with the eyes of this is a compliment. You'd be like my muse or something. She's like, shh. Daisy nods knowingly. Like, I see you, Wyatt Stone number two. She storms out. Gary's like, Daisy. He gets up. He follows her out. She's walking very briskly. We're going to get a brisk Daisy walk. It's not the only time we're going to see it in this series. He's like, Daisy, where are you going? What did I say? She turns back. She is ready to be confrontational. Gary is wishing he hadn't called her back. She's like, what? You said I'm your fucking muse. Like, what? I'm just your inspiration for your next great idea. He says, what's wrong with that? She says, I'm not interested in being anybody's muse, Gary. Okay, not yours, not anybody's. He says, I didn't mean it like that. Well, no, actually, you said it exactly like that, though, Gary. It's what you said. Daisy says, I'm not the muse, okay? I'm the somebody. And there's this pain in her eyes. You can see the deep well of like, nobody has ever heard my voice, and you're telling me that I'm never going to have, you're another person telling me I'm never going to have a voice. Come on now. He stares at her with an open mouth after hearing this muse versus somebody thing, and he just starts laughing at her. Her eyes are even more pained. Like, are you freaking kidding me right now? Gary says, okay, you're the somebody. God, you're the somebody. And he's still laughing at her. The number of people that Daisy needs to drop kick out of her life. I can't. Daisy shoves his chest. She pushes him back. She gets into her car. He's like, what the fuck? Did you just push me? Daisy, she turns on the engine. It's like, Daisy. And then he just mutters under his breath, fucking crazy. She sits in her car and closes her eyes. That, my friends, is gaslighting. Yeah, add Gary to the list of people that just weren't worth it. Okay. Daisy, in her interview in the future, says, no matter how confident you pretend to be, how much you think you can give, if enough people tell you that you're shit, you believe them. Daisy's going to walk into the bar we saw earlier. Remember how we saw this establishment, this bar? We didn't see the name of it, I don't think, but we saw the sandwich board outside that said piano inside. She's now walking into that establishment. There aren't a lot of people in there, but there are a couple. You know, somebody sitting at a table, there's a bartender, somebody at the bar, there's some chatter. Through her voiceover, she says, I just couldn't take it anymore. She says to the bartender, would you mind if she gestures to the piano. He gestures back like, okay, go for it. He's a man that didn't have lines, and so he couldn't speak, but he could gesture. he says, I had to find out. She says in her voiceover, I had to find out if everyone else was right about me or if I was. She walks towards the piano. There's this like a bunch of lights spotlighting it. It's quite nice. The camera, when I think about where this was laid out in the room, I thought this was up against a wall, but there's this really interesting camera angle that we're going to get here. Maybe this was in a different place or shot somewhere else. The camera, there, it looks like a handheld camera that there's somebody behind the piano that walks around the piano and then walks and comes up close to her face. So that's beautiful. It's not a panning shot and it's not it doesn't rotate, but it's like it comes from around behind and then it has a sort of join her. It's really quite lovely. So she sits down at this piano, she takes out her journal, and she sings this song that's very like deep and breathy. And one of the things that I would like to try to track if I can remember to do it here is over the course of the 10 episodes, like how does the style evolve in whatever ways you can interpret style for these characters? Um, and I think when I think about this song, this is her voice is still very quiet. She's not sure if she's comfortable to use it. It's very breathy, very low, a very low register here. And she's singing this song by myself. Pretty on the nose based on what I've been clocking from her so far. Some of the lyrics here, I've been burned on the altar of the rising sun. It's alarming to see how far I can run, but I wind up the same as I always, crying in a heap in some hallway, crumpled in blue. I got to try something new. She's singing. We're now going to cut to the band driving in the van as we're hearing Daisy sing. We're going to see Graham. He's very casually talking to Camilla, like, that keyboardist really added something to the mix, didn't she? Camilla's smiling. She's like, who, Karen? Graham's like, yeah, Karen. Camilla very knowingly is like, yeah, yes, she did. This was Graham making a big reveal to Camilla, and she picks it up right away. Graham laughs very bashfully. She's happy for him that he has a crush. Meanwhile, Daisy's still singing. I could tell by the waves you couldn't see me. People may try, and they'll try to. I'm going to do till I die to, and give it hell. And she's crying now through the song. We're getting close up on Daisy's face. She said, I don't need anybody's help. I can do this with nobody else. I can ruin this night by myself. We're going to see like film footage, like the way Camilla was taking of the band earlier. We're going to see film footage of Warren driving the van, Eddie and Camilla chatting, Graham, Bill, everybody, that we're going to see the band interacting in the van. And then we're going to pull back and see the van driving. I think this is so interesting, the direction these lyrics go. I can peel off these soldiers alone. I can write down my miserable poem. I can drink to my own bloody health. I can ruin this night by myself. Daisy. I mean, it's so interesting, right? Because it's this really, on the one hand, it's a powerful moment of her claiming her voice and claiming a song and and being in public with it, even though it's a very small group that's in this bar. And in another show, for another character, this would be triumphant. But the main point of her lyrics is I can ruin this night by myself. So it feels like this woman has a journey ahead of her. This moment of triumph is also like just a rumination on disaster, really. The song ends. Daisy hears some scattered applause, but there is applause from the people in the room. And she turns, she sort of processes that. She picks up her bag. She leaves the bar. The camera is really low and it's shooting upward on an angle, almost like a Dutch angle kind of thing, but I wasn't sure what line it was lining up with. Um, and it's sort of like her world just sort of tilted a little bit in probably a good way because her world needed some tilting. Uh, something shifted from when she went into the bar and when she came out, and the camera's showing that to us. She walks out onto the sidewalk as we hear Carole King's I Feel the Earth Move playing. She smiles. Then we're going to cut to the band. They're playing music in the van. They're getting into LA. They pass the Whiskey a Go-Go. It's starting to get dark outside. They're seeing some people forming on like the nightlife starting to form on the streets. Billy looks out the window of the van. And then we're going to see Daisy smiling, looking out onto the street. Am I to interpret this that they're meant to be, we're saying that they're looking out at each other, actually, or metaphorically? Like what I feel like it was a very specific lineup of how they have them angled in these shots. And is this actually the first time they see each other? Or is it just meant to conjure that feeling for us? Like there's some point of connection here between Daisy and the rest of the band. Not sure, but it was something I was thinking as I was watching this. Okay. That was the scene by scene breakdown, everyone. Mentioned music as we went through, but I want to have a section here that sort of highlights the songs that I picked up on as we went through. First, if we just look at the needle drops themselves, we've got Dancing Barefoot by Patti Smith, which is going to be the opening credits, always. We've got All Alone, I Sit and Cry by Violet Hall. We have Incense and Peppermint by Strawberry Alarm Clock. Love the name of that group. I didn't know that was the name. Going Back by the Byrds. I think I'm saying this right. Three-fifths of a Mile in 10 Seconds by Jefferson Airplane. Bang a Gong, Get It On by T-Rex. Different Drum by Stone Ponies. Going Back by Carole King. And I Feel the Earth Move by Carole King. So we're kind of loading up on Carole King here towards the end. Also, because of the nature of what this show is, there are some songs that we hear that are being sung by characters. So songs from the Dunn brothers that we hear, we get Susie Q, that was originally by Dale Hawkins, and Have Love Will Travel, not Trouble, Have Love Will Travel by the Sonics. And then we're going to get Stumbled on Sublime by Daisy. Okay, it was by Daisy, Stolen by Wyatt Stone. We also have a song called Over Under by the Winters. During their sound check, we just hear that tiniest little bit of this. And then By Myself is the song that Daisy plays in the bar at the end. So those are the songs that we hear. Let's talk about favorite quotes. I'm going to give you two honorable mentions and then my actual favorite quote of the episode. The two honorable mentions actually come from the same scene. They're both Daisy quotes. The first one is going to be, I'm not the muse, okay? I'm the somebody. I'm interested to know what all of your favorites are. I imagine that the muse versus somebody thing will come up. That it's a very well-known point made in this show in the book, and I think in the book, right? But it's not my most favorite, but I do love it, and it's resonant and it's important, especially to this character. Okay, honorable mention number two is from one of Daisy's interviews. She says, no matter how confident you pretend to be, how much you think you can give, if enough people tell you your shit, you believe them. And that came from the same sequence in her fight with Gary. And now you may be asking, well, Melissa, what's your favorite quote of the episode? Well, let me tell you, it's going to be a Rod Reyes quote. When Rod says to Graham, you need to cool it with the solos, brother. Nobody cares about your technical guitar skills. They want to sing. They want to dance. I absolutely had to make that my favorite. Sorry, it's happening. But feel free to share in the comments what your favorite quote was of this episode, what resonated the most for you. And furthermore, I have some questions that I want to ask you. There's some things that I'd like to take your temperature on as viewers of this program. A few different types of questions I want to ask here. First of all, the first question I want to ask is regarding the pacing. Here we are. We have this episode that opens. It gives us a glimpse of the future. It was like reading the last page of the book and then going back to the beginning. And then we rewind way back to when Daisy was 8. And we're going to show like childhood development for a lot of these characters. And we're going to build it up to 1970. And we're going to spend most of this first episode in the 60s, which is not when this band was big. So, and in fact, they weren't even together yet by the end of this episode. So, I would love to know your thoughts on the pacing. I appreciate what the show was going for. For me, it worked. For me, I like this idea that we're saying, this is going to be an important story to follow. Here's how you know that. And now let's rewind it and really give you some information about why these people got to this place and why this was important in their journey. I think when I rewatch this show, if you want like high-powered episodes and only high-powered episodes, you might skip straight to 8 to 10 in terms of the episodes. People might start their rewatches in different places. I might not necessarily go back to episode 1 when I start a rewatch every single time, but I do think it's really important. That's how I feel about it. But I'd like to know from your standpoint, pacing wise, how do you feel about going back as far as we did in this episode? Do you feel like it adds to the story for you? Do you feel like it slows the story down too much? I'd like to get your thoughts on, like, does this give you the energy that you need going through this story? All thoughts on that are welcome. We'll keep it respectful. I know everybody will have different takes on it, but here's another one that I'm interested to know people's thoughts on. Okay, we get a few different people's, maybe 4 different characters' parents in this episode. I'd love to know people's thoughts. I'd love to know your thoughts about influence that the parents have on these characters, especially based on what you could see in this episode. Like, what are you picking up on? What kind of impact do you think these types of parental choices, parenting styles, what kind of impact do you think this would have? If it were to play out in real life, what do you expect the impact to be for these characters? We see Daisy's parents. We see both of them, but we see more with her mom. We see Billy and Graham's parents, but I would say that the stuff that happens with their dad is more prominent to the story here in this episode. And we see Camilla's parents. We see the dinner scene with both of her parents and her siblings, and then we see that conversation that she has with her mom later on privately. So tell me about what you think about the influence of the parents here. And third question, and this one is really, I want to throw this to all of you because there's a lot of stuff that I probably don't pick up on here in terms of set decoration and props and clothing, because I am not really that familiar with the 60s. So tell me what your favorite touches are from the 60s. And this is a great chance to acknowledge work that a lot of different departments did for this show, like stuff that you saw in Daisy's room, stuff that you saw in Graham's room earlier, stuff that you saw, I don't know, maybe the garage, like these locations that we see, the Sunset Strip, how that was depicted. Like, what can you tell me about the things that you loved about the depiction that we saw of the 60s in terms of how this looked on the screen, both how the characters looked and how the sets looked and the places themselves. So I am going to be really interested to hear what you think about this. And this is a great opportunity for us to acknowledge the work that the crew did on this show. So those are the questions that I have for you. And here we are. We've done the first episode. We made it. Next week, we're going to talk about the second episode. That's how this works. We're going to do this week by week. But for now, like, let's just really savor the episodes as we get them, these deep dive opportunities as we get them. I actively encourage comments in the comment section here of these videos. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this show. I'd love to hear your questions on this show, things that you might want me to explore as we go through the upcoming episodes. And just know that if you do write comments, there may come a point where if I get enough comments as we go through, after I'm done with all the episode recaps, I may very well do some feedback shows where I share some of the feedback that you shared in the comment section. So just know that up front. But the best way to do this is to have a conversation and not just have me talking at you. So I would love to hear what people think about this show. Again, next time we're going to go into the second episode, the second track of the show, if you will. But in the meantime, everybody, don't be the muse. Be the somebody. Bye.